Some of this, we'll just go over some of the things that we covered last time, but most of it's going to be new or a more refined version of what we shared 2 months ago when we got together. As you recall, some of our fundamental concerns in dealing with remote exams were these balancing acts, and I just chose three of them. I think I shared six with you the last time, including practicality and execution risk. But the three we're really concerned about are security, validity, and candidate experience. And unfortunately, in emphasizing security as we do, we're doing this partly because actually program directors in various disciplines have kind of said, "Aren't you worried that individuals could, circumvent the process and sort of take this as an open book test?" Which, of course, we know it's not. And through that emphasis, we want to make sure that the candidates understand it's not because we don't trust the candidates; it's because if we're not sort of designing a secure process, the validity could suffer, and that would mean that someone's performance could be called into question because, well, a few people found a way to kind of get around the rules, and as I say, those rules are that the test is designed to test your knowledge and your competence, and not sort of what you might be able to develop through calling a friend or looking up a resource online. This is designed in a different way. So I want to emphasize that it's not because we don't trust the candidates. The security is actually intended to help the candidates because it exists to lend validity to the result. We also acknowledge that there is a certain intrusiveness to the security checks that are part of the exam, and they create stress and anxiety in what is arguably already a very stressful event for almost everyone who's involved in taking it. We believe that to some level these intrusive steps are similar to the exam center environment itself, but it's a little different, right? Because you actually have a webcam that's on you as the candidate the entire time. There's going to be this, you got to show ID. We got to have you pan your webcam around your room just to show us that your desk doesn't have books on it and extra electronic devices, that your walls don't have charts or information on them, and that you're alone. And we agree that that is intrusive, and it's not necessarily somebody would necessarily that our candidates would be familiar with, although I would argue in about 3 or 4 years, all of our candidates will be familiar with that because they would have taken a test like this in the past, right? But I think as we are right now, looking at colleges and universities across the country doing exactly this, mostly with good success, I think. Certainly there are some controversial concerns, but overall this is an improvement because it doesn't require travel, it doesn't require a large number of people in the same room, which of course are the constraints imposed by the current pandemic. We still need, I'll show you today, which is largely a set of developed ideas. We still need to finalize design, and we need extensive QA of the system. That's from the IT standpoint to make sure that, hey, this works, that we're not going to have the same failure risk that the American Board of Surgery demonstrated back in July. So with that in mind, we're still working on getting this done, and we have to have it done, in fact, in time for our computer-based pilot exam in January. That exam is actually for the diagnostic radiology certifying exam, and it's going to be followed just a few weeks later in very early February with the diagnostic radiology core exam, and that exam involves close to 1,500 candidates. So we're going to try it out on about 150 candidates for the certifying exam. It's because it is the final exam. Basically, those candidates have more experience in taking a test very similar to it, so we're going to use that group as our pilot group and hope to learn from that and further refine what we're going to present throughout the spring, not just in February, of course, but to the physics and radiation oncology candidates in April. And we have some communication challenges. I say some. I mean, it's getting certainly somewhat overwhelming for some of our staff as they try to get through this and make sure we're getting it optimized in time for the first part of 2021. And these elements include the technology check. That's for the candidates to be able to get online and assess, do they have an adequate computer monitor, do they have adequate bandwidth, et cetera, at the location where they intend to take the exam. The interface itself, we want the candidates to be very familiar with it. This should not be something that they're uncomfortable with. The bottom line is we don't want the exam interface to be a factor in determining someone's performance, because it should be seamless, it should be intuitive, it should be easy to manage. And part of the reason we hope it is going to be easy to manage is there's going to be ample time for practice. And for any of these features, actually, the opportunity to get on ahead of time, ahead of exam day, try out your system, be comfortable with the system, and also comfortable that on exam day it's going to work. There's also the ability for us to be flexible with the timing and duration of breaks during the exam sessions. Overall, this offers a lot of advantages, and we hope that's certainly the way it's received. It's going to be possible for the candidate to take a break, to have a meal, or just to kind of decompress for a few minutes, really whenever he or she decides to do that. But there are some confusing elements I'll get to in a coming slide that basically have to do with the fact that if you're going to take a break and basically not be in an active exam session, or walk away from an active exam session, that we have to be concerned about, content and whether or not someone might be tempted to look up an answer to a question that they'd already seen but maybe hadn't answered, or hadn't answered confidently, and they want to check on that before they complete the exam. So those features, as I said, I'll talk about in a coming slide. We'll get multiple channels, including videos, probably voice over PowerPoints, website guides, and then a customer service, which would include not only day of exam customer service, specifically geared towards sort of the technology challenges that people might encounter unexpectedly. But in addition, if you have questions ahead of the exam and need to talk to somebody in our certification services division, those people will be available as well to direct you to the right source, to make sure, again, that on the day of the exam, people are comfortable, they're confident, they understand what they're going to encounter, and it's just about really assessing knowledge and competence, not about how well you can navigate through the system. So we have a couple of things on this slide. Obviously, it's a little overwhelming. At the top, we're talking about the check-in process, the need to show an ID, to scan the room, to show us again that your desktop is clean and that you're alone, and that your walls don't have any information that could somehow help you with flip charts or something like that. We, of course, have selected the vendor, and using sort of in this second set of bullets, we're using commercially available software that really shouldn't be, it's not novel. Again, if you've done this before, people who have not, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're basically saying, well, this is off the shelf in many ways. In fact, if anything, we're kind of dialing it down because we don't feel the need to take professionals, treat them as anything other than professionals. So the goal is, again, just to have reasonable security, but at the same time, not be so intrusive that it's a distraction. I already talked about the breaks, and that relates a little bit to this idea of content blocking. And what this means is that if I were taking the exam and I decide I'm at question 75 and I decide I'm going to take a break, well, if I leave the room, meaning I leave the webcam view, the content I've already seen has basically become unavailable to me moving forward, right? Because I can't go check on an answer or look something up and then come back and answer that question that I'd already seen. So the idea is that previously seen questions would be locked and you wouldn't be able to go back and change your answer. Well, the important thing then is to make sure, have you answered all 75 of those questions at that point that you decided to take your break. We're also going to require that the candidates lock up questions every 30 cases. And the idea here is that if there is an unexpected power outage or a loss in connectivity, that their risk then is minimized, right? Because if I were, again, at question 75 and I told myself, you know what, I'll come back to question 5. I'm not sure about that one. I left it blank, and I'll come back to that one. And then my power goes out. Well, that's okay. I lost one item. But what if I left questions 5 through blank, and I'm up at question 75, and now my power goes out? I've lost those items. So the idea is we're just going to have individuals kind of every 30 cases do a check-in and say, hey, have you at least put an answer in? Even if you're not 100% sure, make sure you've answered those, because we're going to lock this. And this is for the candidate's advantage, to make sure that there aren't a whole lot of unanswered items that they've already seen at the point of that outage. And I think that's a critical concept. It's different from the 2019 model, and we acknowledge that, but it's it's sort of the price you pay for taking the exam in your living room or in your home office, is that for the protection of the candidates, we're just going to say every 30 cases, okay, are you comfortable that you've answered those, because we're not going to let you go back to those, so we can lock them in case there's something unexpected in your power or connectivity, et cetera. This outage question locking is a related question. That is, if it's a 2-minute thing or less, meaning that your connectivity or bandwidth wavers, but that is less than 2 minutes in length, where there's no penalty. Basically, we're going to ignore that. And we want to reassure candidates that those minor outages, which I think we see from time to time, are not going to be an issue. If it goes more than 2 minutes, then we'll have to look at exactly how long was it, what can we do to have some kind of remediation or recovery period. And I wish I could give you an answer, but it really depends. It depends on the length of the outage, at what point in the exam did it take place. Do we have a way to get you back into the exam? And it's going to depend on the length of the outage, as well as, well, what was it? Was it something that was a power, was it bandwidth, et cetera? And we'll try and address that on a case-by-case basis. So I did talk about the identification check and the locking of content. So that was about computer-based exams. This is about oral exams, and there are 3 things I wanted to highlight here. One is, as we said in the past, we're going to have a one-to-one navigator to candidate coverage. The navigator's job is to make this comfortable for the candidates. It's to make sure that they always feel that they have somebody who can guide them through the process. And basically, the 2 of them will be in one electronic room, and examiners will come and go. But the point is, the navigator is in a position to make sure that connection is I'm sorry, not the Wi-Fi connection, but basically the sequence of examiners and the connection to the examiners is established seamlessly. So we view this as a really important feature, and the navigator's job is to make it comfortable, make it seamless. The other thing I wanted to call attention to, and I agree this is a long list, and I didn't want to go through each line, but these are the kinds of things we've been thinking about. After much discussion, we decided that although not all boards do this, we're going to permit headset use. The reason not every board has done it is that headsets can be a security compromise, right? Because we can't tell what the individual is listening to if they're wearing headphones. But we're going to permit them and recommend that they be wired rather than wireless. The reason for that is actually more about battery life than it is about security. But we felt it was more important that the candidate feel confident that they can be heard and that they can hear. And for some candidates, that may be more important than for others, that they prefer to use a headset, but we're not going to require it. We do require it for the examiners to make sure that they've got a headset microphone combination that will, I think, remove chance of loss of sound quality. But at the same time, we're not going to require it, but we are going to permit that for the candidates if they wish. The only other thing I wanted to call a little more attention to, if there's an outage prior to the completion of the period, this would the decision then would depend on the adequacy of the evaluation. So the examiner would make this call. So if the examiner feels that there was enough information and confident that they can make a determination about the candidate's performance, then we're done, and we go on from there. If on the other hand, we're only 2 minutes into a 25 or 30-minute session, then the examiner, obviously, if you're only through the first piece, then it wouldn't make any sense to call that a completed exam. But we're going to give the examiner some latitude about that, so that even if it ends a few minutes early because of a connection issue, or even if you had a loss of connectivity in the middle and got it back, did you actually accomplish enough case material that you feel, as the examiner, that you can come to a determination regarding that candidate? And that'll be, again, in the hands of the examiner. Just a few words about accommodations. I think the ADA accommodation should be easier than in the past, although most of the accommodation that's been requested over the past few decades has been extra exam time. That is an increase over baseline, and we'll be doing that. It's actually quite easy for the computer-based exams. It's a little harder for the oral exams, but we can manage that and accommodate people. Of course, they're going to be in their own home office, etc., so it shouldn't be an issue as far as the physical space. For nursing mothers or expectant mothers, new model really has all kinds of advantages in terms of privacy and flexibility, and we handle those on a one-on-one basis. So whatever the woman feels that she needs, we almost certainly can accommodate that within very broad constraints regarding the exam itself. This really shouldn't be an issue. And in this case, this is merely just let us know, and then we work one-on-one with those individuals to make sure that we can make the necessary accommodations. And again, largely it's about the flexibility and privacy that would be part of that exam experience. This is something we talked about internally just starting probably a month or so ago, and that is the idea of having where the candidates could get all the information they need. And this is of not knowing when have you clicked all the places you need to look for information that may or may not be relevant to your exam. And what we've designed, and it's still in the works as far as the actual component pieces, but the idea is that a candidate will go to one place, and although this document might be updated from time to time, all the information that the candidate would need is in one location, and that would be part of this exam information guide. It's going to be different, of course, for each exam. So whether even within medical physics, whether we're talking the qualifying exam or the oral certifying event, it's going to be different. But the bottom line is that a candidate should be able to go to one place and find out everything they need and not worry that, well, was there an email I missed, or was there a communication that was posted online, or somewhere I was supposed to click on this video, or this technology check, et cetera. So we're working on these. It's obviously going to require a lot of work over the coming weeks. We hope to have that out certainly for the qualifying exams and certifying events for physics, which are well into next year. Shouldn't be a problem to get those done. We were not surprised, but we were gratified to see that the survey and the pilot of 170 eligible, and I just used therapeutic medical physics for this one. That's the largest group, about 170 eligible individuals, and a significant majority elected to participate or volunteered. Now, we can only select about 25 candidates, so we're going to be disappointing a lot of people. This is, the point of a pilot is to make sure that things work, and we can't realistically take on the entire group of 137, for example, and say, okay, you volunteered, we're going to give this a try. We need one trial run to make sure that the pieces that we hope are going to work actually do work. This survey hasn't even closed yet, but these candidates will be chosen at random, and they will form the pilot group for the second half of March when we run through the oral exam. Now, this is a real exam, so it's a pilot, but at the same time, it's a real exam. So we're going to have, basically, if you pass and you've satisfied all of the requirements, you're board certified. If you don't, then you don't get a penalty. There's no, sort of permanent record of this. You come back in May and you take the exam as you would have otherwise with no penalty at all. So not surprisingly, again, pilots, where we've offered these in the past, have always been oversubscribed, and that's a good thing, except we have to disappoint some people, but at least we'll be able to pilot it before administering it to a much larger group in May. Now, I wasn't going to talk about this until just coming up on late last week when we have some issues with the December events that are scheduled for the 7th and 8th of December. I might have those dates wrong, but it's the first half of December. And we were on the phone with Pearson VUE just yesterday, and they admitted that they had not tail exam slots yet, seats in their test centers yet. But they, when I sort of prompted them and I said, well, but you would anticipate having to do that, wouldn't you? And they said, absolutely. So they don't know what the implications are going to be because they don't know about what local regulations and state regulations are going to be. But realistically, if you just look at this curve, and I refreshed it this morning, so you can just barely see this peak right here. That's today. I'm sorry, that's yesterday's data. Actually, that's Monday's data. It looks bad. It looks really bad. So realistically, we're going to get a communication out to those individuals who are registered for the exams to let them know that it would be unreasonable for people to expect that everyone who's currently registered for a December qualifying exam in medical physics is going to have a seat, because Pearson VUE almost certainly will have based on them, and that that those exam seats won't be available. Now, it's going to be, of course, regional. It's going to vary state by state, and even within a state, perhaps in some cities more than others. But the bottom line is, we just want the candidates to know that, as we've said in the past, and we've communicated this over the past few months, that we don't control this. It's taking a chance. And I don't know if there are going to be some individuals. We're offering an April event, so 4 months later, the same exam basically is going to be given to you take it from your living room. We may just say, you know what, it's not worth taking the chance of preparing for the next 4 to 5 weeks. You know what, I won't sign up for that exam, acknowledging what this curve looks like. One of the discussions that we had yesterday with the fellow Pearson View is one of our staff said, that the candidates are watching the news. They're gonna see that this is happening. And I said, right, but they're thinking about that email they got that seat at Pearson View, and they're not thinking the relationship of this graph to that seat. And that's why we're communicating back to them to say there is indeed a relationship between this graph and of course, we don't know just how bad it's going to look in the coming weeks. So I just wanted to share that with you, just to say, we'll give the exam, and my guess is at least some people will be able to sit for it, but to believe that it's the entire contingent that is currently registered, I think is it's just unlikely to occur. I want to thank you to just today. We're glad you're here. Really look forward to hearing your perspective. What do we miss about the communication? What's off? What's confusing or needs clarification? We would really value your input, and if you certainly if something occurs to you tomorrow or next week, that, hey, you didn't think of while we're on the call, get in touch with Matt or me or anyone from the ABR and let us know what we could do better.